Good morning and happy Monday. Happy Memorial Day. Gotta take a drink of the coffee. So today is Memorial Day. So what does Memorial Day mean? Memorial Day means mattress sales, right? That's what it's all about. There's always mattress sales. 40% off. I finally got some sun yesterday as it was finally nice out. So today we take a day to think about and honor all of the men and women who have served in the armed forces and fought for this country in the, dozen or better wars, starting with the Revolutionary War. So I thought today we'd talk a little bit about that and think about that. So how should we do that? What should we do in order to honor them? Well, one of the things that I used to do is I would drag my poor daughter, who was either 9 or 10 or 11 or 12, to all of the monuments in Stevenson County that portrayed and listed all of the men and women who had served in the various wars. And that's one of the things that I would offer for you today to do in order to at least give an idea and a respect for what the sacrifice was in terms of sheer numbers. Because I think if you go take a look at those monuments, and they exist in every county, everywhere in the United States. And today, for those who are watching, I'm talking to people in the United States because obviously to my friends who don't live in the United States, today is not Memorial Day. Today's a regular day. So first I'd offer you, go to the monuments and take a look. And I would go backwards. Start with the most recent monuments, which is probably going to be Vietnam. They probably don't have anything up yet for Iraq or Afghanistan. But start with Vietnam and work your way backwards. And work your way back and finish with the Civil War. And first of all, just take a look at the sheer numbers of people that lost their lives in those various wars. And when you get to the Civil War, I think you're going to be, if you go do this, you're going to be shocked at the numbers, in particular when you get to the Civil War and see how many people died in that war and just how bloody that war was. When PBS did a special on that, which should be watched by every high school kid in the country, they would list out the sheer numbers of battles like Gettysburg, and they would just say the numbers, and they were so astonishing in terms of the amounts that it was really kind of hard to fathom. I mean, in the South, there would be entire towns that would be wiped out, where every male over the age of 12, because it wasn't 18 in the Civil War, it was if you could ride a horse and shoot a gun. So males over the age of 12, you'd have entire towns of hundreds of men that were just wiped out because they would all end up in the same regiment. And if they ended up in the Battle of Gettysburg or they ended up in some of those battles, then they were done. So we fought an incredibly bloody war already in this country against each other because of differences in our beliefs. The North against the South, mostly over slavery, because of a difference in what was right and what wasn't right and what the Constitution said. So we say that everybody, these battles that we do and these wars that we go do, it's to protect our way of life. Okay, well, what does that mean? What does our way of life mean? Because obviously people's ways of life are very different. Your way of life in New York versus Mississippi are two completely different things. California versus Montana, Chicago versus New Orleans. So it's not, when we say our way of life, it's not my way of life or your way of life. It's everybody's way of life, right? It's every culture, it's every religion. The idea is that we're supposed to protect all ways that anybody wants to live as long as that way isn't harming somebody else. Then we did all these battles and we lost all these lives in order to protect that opportunity, right? So it's the opportunity for everybody to live their way of life. That's our way of life as people in the United States. Within certain parameters, we're supposed to respecting everybody's way of life. So how should we think about going about that? Well, when the soldiers came back from Vietnam, that was really kind of my first experience with people that had fought in a war. My dad graduated from high school in 1964, graduated from college in 1968, and he did not go off to Vietnam because he had an injury in high school, which was considered a catastrophic head injury. And he was married, and he had a kid, and he was in college. So he didn't go off to war, but other people did. And a lot of his friends did. So when I was a little kid, there was conversations about what it was like to have been drafted and have served in Vietnam. And for those of you that don't know history, that war became very, very unpopular after the Tet Offensive in 1968. And so the soldiers that came back were not treated well. They were spit on, they were called baby killers, they were not met like heroes. Now, as I got later on into life, I spent more time with my grandfather. My grandfather was drafted and served, actually he wasn't drafted, he enlisted, served in the Navy during World War II. He was a senior in college when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. He finished up his senior in high school at Boston College and enlisted in the Navy and ended up in the South Pacific. So he was very happy when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki because that ended the war with the Japanese and saved him. As I got later in life, I would go with him to the AMVETS. And the AMVETS, you have to have been in an actual war in order to be in the AMVETS. And so they would go there and they would talk and they would drink and they would laugh. And I asked him once, how come you guys don't ever talk about the war? And he pointed to the chairs, something my grandfather would do. He always tried to use the Socratic method. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, there's too many empty chairs. He said, in high school, you'd have most of your high school class would get drafted, and a large percentage of them would not come back. And he said, so there was just too many lost lives. So we didn't talk about the war because of what it was like and how many friends that we had that died. Now, the people that came back from World War II, they were treated like heroes. They were given ticker tape parades. They were honored in every way. If you were wearing a uniform after World War II, you got off of a bus in any town, the first person that saw you would pick you up, give you dinner. You could stay in their house. I mean, you were treated like you should be. You were treated like almost royalty. And then, we had Vietnam, where I had the experience with my dad's friends who were treated terribly. Now, remember that in both of those situations, most of the people that went off and fight didn't have a choice. And if you don't know, in Vietnam, not only was everybody pretty much drafted that went and fought in Vietnam, there were a few volunteers here and there, but almost everybody was drafted. Not only that, but at the time, you could be, at 18 you were drafted, you couldn't vote until you were 21 in the United States back then. So these guys were drafted, then went off to fight, and then came back and were treated like garbage, and they didn't have a choice in the matter. Now, we learned the lesson from that. And when the Iraq War came around, a lot of that war was not popular. But even though the war wasn't popular, the soldiers were. And the daughters and the sons of the people who fought in Vietnam learned the lesson. And they learned that, even if the war is unpopular, you don't take that out on the people that have to go fight it. The people that have to go fight it are treated with honor and respect. So now we honor people before every sporting event, assuming sporting events come again. And you don't hear people criticizing soldiers. In fact, the opposite happens. They might criticize the war, but they won't criticize the soldiers. Well, so for today, I would offer you this thought. I think there's part of us that's forgotten some of the lessons that we learned in the Civil War. We've been through a war of ideas in this country before that actually we took up arms. And it was devastating. It was absolutely devastating. I would really offer you the opportunity today to go look at those monuments. Look at the number of names. It's hard to fathom, quite frankly. If we could do anything to actually honor the men of Normandy, the men of Iwo Jima, the Battle of Gettysburg, or the Battle of Fort Wagner, where the 54th Volunteer Regiment, the first African-American regiment, ran into battle, and they were volunteers, knowing that they were all going to die. There are so many stories of platoons that had to run in first, knowing that none of them were going to make it, and gave the ultimate sacrifice at the altar of freedom, that maybe what we can decide is that our honor to them is going to be that our discourse is going to go from hate to civil. We're not all supposed to think alike. We're not all supposed to have the same values. We're not all supposed to have the same ideas. It was Benjamin Franklin. Sorry, I couldn't remember who said it. Benjamin Franklin said, if we're all thinking alike, somebody's not thinking. Now, that was also taken by Patton, and he's credited with it a lot more, but it actually first came from Benjamin Franklin. And Patton said, if we're all thinking alike, then somebody ain't thinking. We're not supposed to all think alike. Protecting our way of life is supposed to mean that we all get to live different lives and have different values and then different ideas. And then as a whole, we come together and figure out what the majority of the country needs to do in order to navigate that, which is a difficult process. Democracy is the art of disciplining oneself so that you don't have to be disciplined by others. Winston Churchill loved the United States. He talked about it all the time, and he said, I love the United States because you can count on them to do the right thing right after they've done everything else. So my offer in terms of a thought for today, for those of you that are watching that are of my friends that live in the United States, is to go check out those monuments and look at those names. And then maybe the lesson that we can all learn is that the discourse that we need to have on the national, state, and local level needs to become one of civility. And that we're not going to agree all the time, and we're not supposed to. And we're not going to agree on how things are supposed to be dealt with, and we're not supposed to. But at the end of the day, what we really are all trying to do is to protect the ability for each individual to participate in that conversation. And win, lose, or draw, in terms of what you think should happen, make it so that the next generation has the opportunity to continue in that same conversation. When George Washington decided not to run again as president, one of the main things that he talked about with the rest of the world was to be careful about partisan fighting. Eisenhower did the same thing. After 2 incredibly successful presidential terms, on a platform that right now would look like a Democrat, not a Republican, he spent the rest of his life going around warning on spending too much money on the military, on deficits, and on partisan fighting, that it would ultimately end in the demise of this country if we didn't approach things differently. Wise men that told us a long time ago, this is a country of ideas and of differences. Embrace the differences. Don't make them a negative, make them a positive. So as we move forward today, I'd really offer you the opportunity. Go look at those monuments, and then think about a way that we can engage in these conversations, but we can do it in a way where we move forward, not backwards. Thanks for watching, everybody, today. We're going to get through this.